Okay, so this now is live, and in a second, my YouTube will start updating. And then I'll have to drop the volume down on my YouTube channel. But I've got basically, there we go, so that's good. All right, so I can basically see the YouTube channel as well. And we are now live. Okay, so I'm expecting that this is going to have people trickling in at various different times. There was actually a really quite large response across the various different channels that I put it on, on the VR spatial audio groups and the various different sort of Facebook groups. And I said to people that they could Twitter it out and do whatever and share it however they wanted. And the interesting thing about that was that there are lots of people saying, oh, what do I have to join? Who do I have to get involved with, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, nobody, it's, just here's the link and come and join. And with a lot of these things, you might, if you get 50 people who say, that's awesome, I'm going to be there, you'll be lucky if you get sort of 5 sort of thing. And that's fairly traditional because people get busy, people forget, et cetera. So I will be interested to see how many people we do get over the course of this. We'll run it for about an hour and we'll see how we go. I mean, if we run out of steam, then we run out of steam. I have no particular agenda. The main reason why I started this is because a lot of people have kind of said, this would be great, we need this, et cetera. And I would like this to be an opportunity for people to talk about what we think we need and try and work out what questions need to be asked. Now, Sally and I are both on the AEST technical committee for the new realities, and this is also going to be a resource to help that technical committee make some decisions, work some things out. So from that point of view, anybody here who basically has anything to say, please join in. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, and I can see that there is a handful of you, you may decide that you want to stay there, that's fine. But if you want to join in on the Google Hangouts, there are still some slots. So by all means, click on that link and join us. And one of the things I'm going to do is, all right, so Robert, I just muted your microphone because we could hear you clunking around in the background. If you want to say anything, please just unmute your microphone and jump back in. The only reason I did that is because it just means that we can, those of us having a discussion can have that discussion, and you can feel free to do whatever you need to do in the background there. So if you're wanting to join in, please do. If I mute your microphone, it is not that I'm asking you to shut up and go away. It's just that we can hear some of the background noise. And so I will just temporarily mute you. So at any time, if you've got anything to say, just unmute yourself and jump back in. So,
Right, sorry about that. We got a full development going on here.
That's totally fine. You do what you need to do and mute and unmute as you see fit. So, all right. So I'll just start with one of my core reasons for wanting to do this is because, like a lot of things, the technology we use allows us to do some pretty amazing things. But if it's not actually facilitating and helping us to do those amazing things, then it is a barrier, it is a hurdle, and it doesn't do any of us any good. So I'm hoping that this is one of those areas where we can have a bit of a discussion and start to work out, are there things we need to be talking about? Are there things that the technical committee needs to know? Are there things that we need to be ranting about to the producers of the various different media and suggesting to them that there are better ways of doing things? So I'm just going to shut up for a little while and see if anybody has anything specific that they want to raise, and we can just take this conversation in whatever direction it needs to go in. And I'll finish by saying hello, Larry, who's just joined us.
Well, I think a good place to start is just sort of a top down and maybe summarize a little of what we're talking about when we say new realities, because then that positions us to be able to start to discuss the requirements of each and differentiate between them and see similarities between them, and then we can address them.
I think that's excellent. Do you want to start that off, Larry? From your perspective?
No, I think you guys are actually more deeply into it than I am at the moment.
All right. Sal, do you want to say anything about that?
Says the guy that's writing the book. I've got Kate over here.
Yes. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. No, Sal, you go first, and then I'll jump in, or either of you guys. I'm more than happy to do it. But the other point is that those of you who know me know that I can talk for hours, and I don't want to dominate this. I'm more than happy to pick up the slack, but I also want other people to be involved. So, Sal, let's hear your definition, top down, of where you think the different realities fall currently.
Right. So when we, like, my personal belief is that when we're talking about new realities, we're talking about the spectrum between VR right up to, which is virtual reality, right up to mixed reality. With augmented reality, I don't know whether it really belongs in the middle, but it might also be like a bit of an X shape at some points where you have things that are intersecting with each other, or particular manifestations of different technologies that have that are slightly tangential or have additional features but aren't on the like main pathway between like VR and mixed reality. I also kind of think that when it comes to augmented and mixed realities, that in comparison to virtual reality, that we have, like, whatever understanding that we have of it right now is also quite limited, because when it comes to augmented reality and mixed reality, particularly like visual technology that we have access to, it's very, I don't want to call it premature, but it's very early technology. Not very many people have access to it, even though HoloLens has a global distribution. And I feel that that really limits like the total perhaps audio understanding of how it fits in and how it impacts on our craft as well. I guess the simplest way. Sorry?
I was just going to ask if you can clarify the difference between augmented reality and mixed reality in the way you're talking about it.
Yeah, I was actually going to go into that just next.
Well, there you go.
Hi. Sorry.
It's
Hi, Linda.
Sorry, my Firefox decided to vomit all over me, and so I had to jump onto my husband's laptop. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
I hope
We're
you
just
didn't break
starting
his
off by
laptop
doing.
jumping on it.
Wait, I'm sorry. 3 people at the same time.
Mine wasn't worth it.
Ah.
I was just going to say that we're just starting by a bit of a top-down of the kind of how we're perceiving the differences between AR, VR, MR, and I'm going to throw in HR there in a second and explain that one. But Sal, if you want to keep going.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just gave my perspective on how I feel about the continuum between virtual reality and other realities. But when I obviously have most experience with virtual reality, and to me, I see that as being a complete replacement of the stimulus, whether it's but particularly visual and auditory stimulus as well. I don't think anyone should be playing around with smells, because that's extremely like manipulative of people's like emotional states too. I just have feelings about that, particularly with advertising. When it comes to augmented reality, I see that as being an information overlay on top of the world that you see in front of you. However that's done, whether that's done with like a clear glass and like the Magic Leap style or the HoloLens style of lens that allows for extra information to be overlaid over the top of that, or whether that's passed through if a Vive has a camera on the front. And then mixed reality, I see that as being like adding a layer of interactivity with those visuals that you have in that space. So really mixing those completely fabricated or completely imported visuals and auditory signals into your real world.
If I can just jump in for a second, I just want to say hello to both Chris and Michael, and let you guys know the reason why I muted your microphones is just because I could hear a bit of background noises in your office. That's not asking you to be quiet. By all means, if you want to jump in, please do it any time, and you can just unmute your microphones whenever you want to say anything. I'm just muting microphones for those people who've got sort of a bit of background, just so that it keeps the signal clear for everybody. Thanks, Sal. I'm just going to jump in really quickly. So I'm actually writing a book at the moment, and so no, Linda, you're not. You don't need to be, because you're nice and quiet where you are.
Okay, thank you. Just checking.
Yeah, no. Your space was quiet. It was just a couple of people have got sort of open plan offices there, which is there's a bit of background noise going. So I'm writing a book and on VR, AR, and MR, and part of that is kind of defining them. And one of the things that I'm finding is that there are actually very blurry lines between them currently. And I'm not sure that those blurry lines are going to go away. And in some ways, I don't know whether they need to go away. There's also actually HR, believe it or not, there's a term that refers to hyperreality, and that was coined for a specific installation. And actually, after seeing what they're doing, the hyperreality term is actually not an inappropriate one. But generally, it comes down to virtual reality is when we replace the entire real world. So you put on a VR headset, you can't see the real world, you probably can't hear the real world, and I actually think it's probably safer if it is that way. Alternate reality tends to be where we have a blending of the real world. So in virtual reality, you go into a virtual world. In alternate reality, we bring virtual objects and characters into the real world. In mixed reality, you kind of do whatever you want. And hyper reality was used because they were actually including quite effective haptic feedback and things like that. Now, one of the core reasons why I started this group actually came about from the work I'm doing with the Facebook spatial audio team. And one of the reasons why they engaged me is because they're doing a lot with 360 video, and it's the new thing, and it's sexy, and everybody's interested in it. And one of the problems that they've had is they get some big studio who wants to produce some fancy, awesome 360 experience for people, and then they farm it out to a traditional audio studio to do all the audio. And then the audio studios tend to not really understand how spatial audio is working. So these are guys who are used to working with 5.1 or 7.1, i.e. mixing in a box, and they apply the exact same stuff, which means they are completely missing how spatial audio can work.
So let me just jump in for a second, clarify something. Are you basically saying what they're missing is the entire object model aspect?
Yes, but it's actually more than that, Larry. One of the things that I had, and I'm not going to say who, because I don't want to be dobbing people in, but I actually had a discussion with somebody who really should have known better, and is describing to me how their technology is really, really cool, and VR is really, really cool. And if you want to have VR with a group of friends, you can all sit there with your VR headsets on, unplug the headphones and listen through speakers. And I'm like, what? No, you can't. You really can't do that, because the whole point of VR is you've got the head tracking aspect of it, which doesn't work through speakers. But more importantly is the way that spatial audio works is in the same way that VR removes the real world and replaces it. So I can turn my head and I can only see the virtual world. That's how the audio is supposed to work. Because basically, if we're trying to give you the environment of a cathedral, and I'm listening to it through speakers in my room, which is 2 meters by 6 meters, I've got cathedral room reflections mixed with 6 meter by 2 meters, and it doesn't sound the same. And this is one of the really critical differences of perhaps not MR and perhaps not AR, but for VR to actually work correctly with simulating a new environment, it really shouldn't ever be done through speakers. It should be done through headphones.
So, Stefan, how are you then approaching those people that are doing research into, kind of the old-fashioned crosstalk cancellation and trying to render this over speaker layouts? I mean, what would be your kind of talk that you would give to those people doing that type of research that want to get this out of headphones and think that crosstalk cancellation and other forms of multi-channel playback over a certain set of speakers can take the place of headphones? How would you address that?
I think, and this is an opinion based on just my position and the stuff I've worked on, I think where I'm heading is that if we're talking about VR, and I'm open to somebody, suggesting another approach to this, but in my mind, if we're talking VR, I think VR means a headset and headphones.
Right.
As soon as you remove the headphones, I'm not saying you can't do that, but as soon as you remove the headphones and you're using speakers or whatever, that to me is almost definition number one of mixed reality. Because it is no longer a virtual reality, because it isn't a virtual reality, because you're combining the audio is actually now happening in the real world. As soon as it comes through speakers, it's occurring in my real world space, which means it is not virtual reality. It is alternate reality or mixed reality. That's my gut feeling of it. But I'm more than happy to hear other people's thoughts on that.
Yeah, Steph, I don't know if interesting is the right word to use within that context, but like even like we like at OSIC, we've visited one of the San Diego University's research facilities and had demos of their like body tracking, head tracking, like binaural speaker arrays, and we found that that's effective if that's what you have access to or what the kind of experience that you want to give to people. I think that it's very difficult to make like really hard and fast, you know, headphones means this and speakers means that, when there are like a multitude of different ways in which these technologies can like precipitate when you have different location-based styles of installation. Particularly, there's like every space and every application is going to be different, particularly if the space that the user is sitting in is moving around, or if they want to have like an in-car demo of something like that and use a Dirac style of like processing that they've been developing for decades. I think that, you know, where VR sits industry-wise and how many verticals exist within it, it's hard to make hard and fast calls like that.
So it would seem that...
So this is Mike Peterson, if I might, for a minute. I work for a company called Mechdyne Corporation, and we actually design and build immersive virtual reality systems that aren't headset based. So imagine a cube that you walk into, 10 foot by 10 foot by 10 foot on a cube. Every surface, including the floor and the ceilings, were projected screens. And so this is a little different form of virtual reality. We've been doing this for almost 20 years now, these types of immersive rooms like this. And so, and we do use speakers in an environment like that, perhaps 20.4 surround sound. And we use like Meyer Sound, their virtual or their VRAS, virtual room acoustic system, with microphones to kind of reprocess your own voice so that you sound like you're in a cathedral or whatever while you're in the middle of this environment. And so we certainly would call that a virtual reality environment. And we realize this is more of a high-end, customized environment, and not the highly available consumer-grade headset environments. But I just wanted to make sure that we're including all different types of environments as we go here.
And that's a really good point, Michael. I'd actually, and it's interesting because yours actually sounds very similar to one of the other ones I saw, which was referred to as hyper reality, because it is, as soon as you're allowing somebody to be in the space and moving around and getting haptic feedback and everything like that, it tends to fall into that. And it is difficult. I completely understand that it is really difficult to go, here's your pigeonhole, here's somebody else's pigeonhole, here's somebody else's. One of the reasons why I think, and this is sort of commenting on your comment, Sal, which again, I'm not trying to disagree with, but one of the issues is that what you've described of that so Michael's amazing space with all the speakers in it, and the thing that you're talking about, Sal, whilst they are absolutely valid and really, really important, the issue is that for the average user, right, when we get down to like if we talk about, are we playing a console game or are we playing a PC game, for instance? That was one of those sort of discussions that happened sort of 10, 20 years ago. And then that line started to get blurred. But for the average user who is, the kid in the street or the family who want to go somewhere, they're going to adopt sort of terms. And once those terms get adopted, it doesn't matter what we want to call them. Once the general public decide that it's called X, whether it's VHS or Betamax or whatever, once the general public decide that they're going to call it X, they're going to call it X, and there's nothing we can do. So I guess what I would like to do is at least have some sort of feeling amongst ourselves that we can maybe sort of guide that a little bit. And this is one of the reasons why I sort of say VR being headsets and a thing, because that really is, the PlayStation VR is what people are going to think of, because that's what your average user is going to have, a Vive or a PlayStation VR. And I am in no means trying to suggest that Michael's thing is not a valid use of VR, but in some ways, I actually think it's better for all of us, including you, Michael, if we actually assign it a term that is actually more important, because I think what you're doing is more important. So calling it hyper reality or whatever buzz term we want to use actually benefits you, because it basically means that the consumer can say, hey, that sounds a little bit like virtual reality, but it sounds more. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think, Stefan, one of the golden opportunities that we have, since I believe all of us are pretty much part of the new AEST on virtual and augmented reality, is that definitions, before we can even get to discussing standards, which of course AES is going to want to do as soon as possible because they're in the standards business, before we even get into discussing standards, there needs to be a basic set of definitions that are agreed upon. And that's going to be, I mean, to me, that is one of the first steps that the TC, backed up by the community as a whole, should take, is what is the definition of this stuff, you know? And under those definitions, are there subcategories? Like if we say VR is X, are there subcategories under that definition that might cover, well, VR over headphones versus VR over some type of speaker arrangement? And so I think these types of definitions are an important step for the VR audio community to take before we start getting into, okay, from there we go on to maybe establishing some best practices that fall within those definitions. And from there we can start taking a look at the early steps of standardization. And I know it's kind of funny because every time you mention audio standards, it's like, oh, you know, what's the thing we love about audio standards? There's so many to choose from. So,
oh, you love that, do you? No.
But I think we need to start somewhere, and you know, based on the feedback that I think we all saw at the conference, or all of us that attended the conference last fall, was kind of the definitions of what is VR. What is audio for VR? What is audio for AR? What are the differences between the two? Where do we bring in where do we go into MR? And you know, do audio haptics follow into this? Things like companies like Subpack, who's making a device that is basically a haptic audio device. And then I was at CanJam with Timothy on Saturday, and we were checking out the Smythe Realizer. And yes, I saw the folks from OSIC there. Thank you. Hello. And they were talking about that and I came across this during my own research, that once you go over headphones, you are missing that visceral low frequency input. And so Smythe recommends putting a vibration plate under the chair when you use their system. So where does that fit in to all this? Is that part of VR? Is that part of AR? Is it part of MR? So, you know, without going into some long pontification here, I think that coming up with definitions and where certain technologies and certain practices fall within those definitions is a really, really important first step for all of us to take. And since we're part of a TC, what a great opportunity to do it. So
yeah, and that's exactly why I started this discussion, and I'm hoping to hear from everybody. And Chris, you're looking like you have something to say there.
I was just going to agree, but I don't know if my audio is working here.
No, that's good.
But yeah. I mean, it seems like there needs to be a distinction between, you know, the rendering and the intent. And clearly, the intent in VR is to replace the perceptual reality, and the intent in something like AR is to augment it. So whether you can see the room or hear the room, I agree, that's AR, right? And you want to render things appropriately within that environment. For VR, you want to replace the scene, and you can render that over headphones or speakers. So I think the manner of rendering is a little different issue than whether it's VR and AR.
Yeah, I really like that. That's a really good one. The intent, I think that's very, very important. Kato?
Yeah. So I want to kind of jump off of where Linda was at, and maybe instead of talking about that definition, maybe we can start with the audio itself. So, you know, spatial audio is obviously a very big component of that. And there's kind of this haptic audio thing. And then I'd say separate from that is the sound propagation entirely, because that's when you start talking about augmented reality versus virtual reality, recreating a virtual environment versus augmenting the one that you're in. And that really is a discussion about sound propagation, which I think entirely different in how you render that audio at a spatial capacity, whether it's surround, audio based, and all these formats which fall under trying to recreate spatial audio. So maybe starting with spatial audio, kind of what exactly that means, and separating that from sound propagation, separating that from haptic feedback, and then tying that towards our different definitions of reality might be a great way to start breaking this up into pieces that feel a little bit less gooey and weird, you know?
Because, like, I think sometimes if we get caught up in like what we're applying for the audio to, particularly since we've already said at least 300 times that like those lines are blurry and they're going to keep getting blurred and shifting around quite a lot, we might lose sight of like what our ideas of what like our definitions are. We can always apply all those definitions, those terms, those practices to where they end up falling and what they're like applying to. But it might be a nice way to think about it, to really flesh out our ideas and our practices in a way that actually is not informed on the technology all the time, but is also informed on the history of research and the history of practice within our own field as well.
Yeah.
Can I cast another angle on the same thought, which is I think we have two things that are sort of in conflict with one another that we need to sort of recognize. One is to do standards or anything, any kind of specifications, you need to be specific. That's where we need to have the definitions before we can really proceed. But the nature of technology and the way it evolves is it likes to be pretty loose and fancy free, and people just go where their ideas come up and their technology develops. And both of those things are going to happen in parallel. And so I think our most productive method is to be able to recognize that and just try and find some way. And I don't know everybody's names, but the gentleman that was speaking a moment ago talking about breaking it down into basically functional parts. He was talking about haptic and environment. I think those are going to remain more constant, whereas the definitions of augmented reality, mixed reality, all that are going to remain more mushy. So I sort of agree with him that focusing more on the perceptual attributes that we know people have and are going to continue to have is probably a good way, a more solid ground to approach it on.
Or there might be some pleasant ground in between, you know, because again, standards are going to be looking for these solid definitions, right? So I think there might be some pleasant ground somewhere in between for now. And the bottom line is this stuff is just moving way too fast that we're not going to be able to like carve in stone, okay, this is the definition of VR audio. This is the only definition of VR audio, and this is going to remain the same forever and ever and ever. But we have to at least start with some type of definition, even if it's a little bit of a soft definition, and we allow that. Let's say that we're creating a document of definitions of various areas and workflows and playback methodologies and whatnot. There's going to have to be an understanding that that is a living document, but we got to start kind of drawing these lines in the sand sometime at some point. Because if I go to another conference and somebody throws a headset on me with 360 visual and stereo audio playback and tells me it's VR, I think I'm going to share something.
And this is the point that Linda makes, and this is one of the things where it is this weird situation where we've got multiple factors coming in. Linda's absolutely correct, and I think we've all agreed on that, is that the problem is that we can't specify anything until we've got some definitions. And even if they are loose definitions, we can't pigeonhole these things into ironclad definitions because it's just not going to work. The technology is changing far too quickly. And this is actually one of the other problems, is that one of the other reasons why I started this group is because traditionally, technical committees can actually take quite a while to actually work out what they want to do and how they want to do it. And the problem at the moment is that, like with writing the book that I'm writing at the moment, I have rewritten the opening page about 5 times. And because in the 4 or 5 months that I've been working on this book, the landscape is shifting so quickly that basically my book is at very real risk of being redundant the day it comes out. So what's interesting about this is that I've started to actually move back from specific, do this thing, press this button, it's this thing, into far more sort of conceptualized sort of stuff, because I think the whole thing is so loose at the moment. And the thing that Linda brings up is something also, there's another reason why I did this. it shouldn't surprise me, and it doesn't. But the other issue is that at the AEST conference, there was almost every single speaker basically said, "Oh, it's the Wild West out there, and it's a time where legends are created and heroes are forged." And I'm sitting mumbling under my breath and saying, "Yes," and the Wild West was full of snake oil salesmen. And Linda's absolutely correct. The number of when I was doing research with a couple of the big companies, and I was doing some research with Magic Leap and some of the other people, and we had every week there was some new spatial plugin company that were trying to sell their product, and we analyzed some of these, and some of them were just bog standard stereo. There's a very, very simple explanation for this. It's called fraud. There are people out there who are quite literally believing they can just hand us a stereo file and we're just going to go, "Oh, that's awesome. Here's $1 billion. Let's buy your company." They honestly believe that we are that stupid. Unfortunately, some people don't understand exactly what this technology is all about. And this is another reason why it's really important that at the very least, those of us who are here right now, even if we can't get our definitions 100% correct, I think most of us could agree that if I passed around a file to everybody and said, "Is this spatial audio?" I think all of us would be able to go, "No, that's crap."
Right.
And so I think we, in some ways, have to really try and protect the people who don't know, educate the people who want to know, and literally set on fire and fire into deep space the people who are trying to take advantage of the situation by ripping people off.
Yeah. I
All
agree.
right, I have to do another meeting. Godspeed on the defines.
Actually, I think
Thanks, Kato.
this is a good moment to simply note that we've obviously identified definition as being a major issue. It's not the only one, but most of the other issues that we may bring up are going to follow on definitions. And the next one I wanted to bring up, which will follow on definitions, and we've already touched on, is tools. Is obviously there's going to be a whole discussion about how are we going to produce this material, both in terms of best practices and in terms of the actual available tools and working with tool makers and all that sort of stuff. So there's another stick of dynamite thrown into the room.
But an important one.
It's a big one, and I guess one of the other issues that I have with software in general. I mean, I'm sitting here with two computers with so many pieces of software that I use all the time, and the issue that I have with some of them is that some of them seem to have been developed by very, very clever programmers who are living in absolute isolation on the far side of Mars and don't ever talk to anybody, including the people who are supposedly going to use their tools. And so we get this problem where tool makers go, "Hey, here's this really awesome tool. Here you go." And I, as a creative person, have to basically go, "Well, it's kind of nice, but did you actually, before you made it, did you talk to the people who you thought were going to use it? Did you actually ask them how they work? Did you ask them what they need to create?" And the answer in a lot of cases, sadly, is no. I'm just a clever programmer who thought I'd do a clever thing, and it's up to you to figure out how to use it. And this is ridiculous. This is a ridiculous approach that almost no other industry does.
Yeah, but 'twas ever thus in our industry. It's always been this way. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen it be exactly like that until you finally pry that engineer out of the lab and put him in an actual session in the field, and then things change quickly.
Yeah. So is it possible that we can do that as soon as possible with this new technology? Actually, like literally, and I'm not sure whether all of you guys do this. Maybe it's just an Australian thing, because Sal and I have no fear whatsoever of doing this. Sally and I basically are very good at basically going up to people and saying, "You know what? I really love the direction you've gone with this, and it could be really, really good, except for A, B, and C, which suck and actually make my life hell every single day, and I want to kill myself every time I open your program." So would we please just, make it a little bit more user-friendly?
Yeah.
I guess it's an interesting problem because like obviously we want the tools to be as good as possible, but particularly at this point in time with these technologies that are coming through, and we understand because we're doing, like, we're in the field, we're trying to figure this stuff out, we're trying to make content, and we're using tools that are effectively still in development. And that have been pushed out into market as quickly as possible, even if their workflow nuances have been consulted with the industry. So we're in that process of consultation at the moment. I guess what I like from my previous experience, like actually working in a game studio, I appreciated the most when I could have like really open dialogue with those people that were developing stuff. But it kind of seemed that unless you were working on like the latest AAA game, or like the biggest franchise of film you could imagine, they didn't want to speak to you. Which makes it very, very difficult, because like I feel like there's a lot of legacy from like film industry and music industry that really wants to dictate archaic work practices and like archaic types of relationships with archaic types of companies. And when we need to be a lot more nimble and a lot more and have basically like I see a lot of new features that need to come through, and I don't believe that some of the existing big dogs of linear sound editing will ever, kind of cotton on to the fact that they need to do that last year instead of in 3 years' time. Yeah. So I don't know whether I don't know whether the TC can help with that, or whether we can, while we develop our definitions and our best practices, actually think about what sort of features we want, and actually put forward those proposals to these companies, how we facilitate those relationships and that movement.
I want to get.
Sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
I was just going to say, I actually wanted to get Linda's input on exactly that, because this is one of the things that I'm actually introducing you on this one, Linda, because basically at the AVAR conference, there was one person who stood up who made a really good remark in that, and I don't know where he was from, but he stood up and said he'd been working with the new realities for quite some time, and he'd been doing a lot of stuff in Los Angeles, and he'd been dealing with a lot of the music producers in the music industry. And he said that literally a very, very large chunk of the music industry was just like, no, not interested. We've been doing it this way. We've been doing it in stereo for 20 years. We don't care. And he finished his statement by basically saying he now refers to those people as dinosaurs, and the new realities is an extinction level event for those people.
Yes.
And so what I would like to get, Linda, your input on this is that is there actually any point in us trying to engage with these people, or are they just so stuck in their ways that they're literally just going to tell us to go away?
Well, are you talking strictly from the music standpoint, the music industry standpoint?
Linear media in general.
The point applies across almost all standpoints.
Yeah. Good point. I think all we do is the VR AR is just going to continue to be a tidal wave, and these people are either going to get out a surfboard and ride the tidal wave, or they're going to drown from it. So, I mean, is there any way that we can convince these people? When they start losing revenue, I think that's going to be a very convincing thing for them. When they realize that their old way of doing things is losing revenue to the new way of doing things, that's going to be the most compelling thing to convince them to start listening to what people are doing, the new technologies are doing. So is there, we can continue with outreach by showing up at conferences and just beating the drum, but and trying to just enlighten these people as to what the potential is. For me, one of the most, because we've been working with music, live music broadcast and music videos here, it's like, why isn't every artist on the planet embracing this? Because it's amazing. And so how can I go out and convince a bunch of artists or a bunch of filmmakers, a bunch of anybody else to get on board with this when do we have that power to convince them? Or do we just let the technology roll out and roll over them if they choose not to adopt? Don't know.
You're talking about transition, and this has happened before, over and over again, in all the different media technologies. And I mean, one of the greatest examples is when Pro Tools came in the film industry. There were guys that hung on with their moviolas for a long time, but eventually they had to give them up. I did an article on the music for Star Wars Episode 1. Well, the music editor was not touching Pro Tools. He knew how to edit music, but he was smart enough to know that he had to work with Pro Tools, but he wasn't going to do it himself. So he hired a Pro Tools jock to do it. The point is this: the transition is going to happen. Part of it is going to be they're going to see the loss of revenue and respond. As far as what we can do, there are two things, I think. One is, as you're saying, show them the potential. And that would have a lot to do with being able to set up demos and round up a bunch of people and bring them in and say, here's where it's going, and give them examples of what's actually happening right now, productions that are doing it. The other side of it is to try and make a historical point to them about, hey, do you remember what happened to those Moviola guys when Pro Tools came in? Do you remember what happened to, show them a few historical examples that they've already seen happen and say, that's where your revenue is going to go if you don't move with this.
Right.
I think those are the two things we can do.
Yeah, and if I can give a quick anecdotal story that speaks to the power of VR audio done correctly, Conan O'Brien decided to do. He had kind of like this Conan O'Brien VR app, and then he was also doing a VR capture of his actual live TV show. These were two different things done by two different groups of people. So he had one crew capture him for his VR app, and Timothy did the spatialized audio for his little VR, Conan O'Brien's VR app. And then his television crew set up a 360 camera for his actual television show. And when Tim was talking to the audio guys that did the TV show, and Tim was saying, hey, how did you do the audio? Oh, we just took a stereo feed off the production console and married that with the camera capture, the 360 camera capture. Tim pulls out the app that he worked on, put the gear on them, and said, oh, this is what we did. And the audio guys were blown away, like, holy shit, we didn't even know we could do this, So because again, it's that, hey, let's just set up a 360 camera on stage and take a stereo audio off the production console. It was and just,
it's really common. It's really, really common.
Yeah, but when those audio guys heard the spatial audio that Tim did, they were absolutely blown away, and they didn't even realize that they could have done that. They were completely unaware that they could have done something like that, very, very easily, actually. So it's this kind of continually educating people. Just keep getting it out there, continually educating people, and just, I think on my Twitter feed I said we all kind of need to be evangelists for this technology until people just get it. So, because I really don't want another person to hand me a pair of headphones again with stereo tracks coming out of them, because I'm just going to smack them with them. So
I would say it's certainly an awareness thing still. When we go to shows like with the OSEC booth, we'll get a lot of just even like VR and 360 filmmakers that come through, and they're just like, I've heard about this 3D audio stuff, but I don't know how to do it. How do I do it? And then it becomes our job to, even though we have like a platform for like reproduction and a pipeline for creation, to actually like talk them through sort of like all the options and like how much money do you have and all that kind of stuff. So those conversations are still really important, and the more places that we can show up and have those conversations with people, the wider reach like our message has. and Sally, I sincerely hope that your panel gets accepted to Vision Summit. Our panel got turned down for Vision Summit, and the depressing thing about Vision Summit is I went on to Vision Summit 2016's show, their schedule. Out of what is it? 2 days of 3 sessions per day. They had one audio panel last year, and that was by Dr. Singhaus from Dolby. His discussion was audio for VR. That was it, just audio for VR. It was the only audio session out of a 2-day conference with three tracks per day. It was sad. It was sad. So, I mean, I've kind of made it my job to go out to these conferences and go, where's your audio? You need more audio. So I think it'd be good for all of us to work towards that. So the struggle is really real on that front. Like, I always try and submit like a panel and a talk about VR audio, particularly from the interactive perspective for most conferences, and sometimes they just don't give a shit. And it's really sad because I think sometimes people think that because you can get a programmer to just put in sounds in a game, that makes audio very simple in games, or that you have microphones that are embedded into cameras. That means that audio for films is easy.
And that's especially bad for the 360 stuff, because there's a couple of cameras that have microphones in them, and they think, oh, that's okay, that's all we need to do, we can just throw that in. Yeah. But I mean, speaking to what you were saying, Linda, and also picking up on what Larry was saying, this literally happened. This is what describes what I did on Monday. Right, so this is basically making some videos. I was doing a test demo. So I was using Reaper for pretty much, I've been using Reaper for about a week and a bit, but I've been asked to use Reaper for something. So I was using Reaper. I was using a spatial plugin that I basically never used before. And I basically put together a very simple ambience thing with just spatialized wind. And I rendered that out. I then basically exported it, grabbed the 360 video, and basically managed to encode the spatial thing into the video. Okay, so that was basically me using 3 new pieces of software that I'd never used before, doing a 360 video basically for the first time. That step took me about an hour. Then I spent the rest of the day trying to get the damn thing to work on the phone. This is the thing about this. It was an utter joke because, so I grabbed this phone on the weekend. So this is the Samsung, so that I could basically run it with the Gear VR, okay? For a start, there was almost 5 hours of just updates on the phone before it would actually do anything in regards to the particular piece of software. 5 hours of getting this thing. Oh no, there's another update. There's another update. There's another update. Then I had to install all the Gear VR bits and bobs. Then there were updates for all of that. Multiple updates. Now, those are just, okay, you could say, well, that's a one-off thing you have to do to set up the phone. Except that with this new software, the updates are so often that it's ridiculous. And if you don't have the updates, it just shuts down and says, no, I'm not going to do that because I need the latest update. The other thing was that I then found out that specifically, this is the Samsung phone with the Samsung Gear VR. It's specifically designed to do this, to get a video to actually even appear, the VR menu thing. The video has to have the name of the video changed so that before the file extension, the last 3 characters are 360, so that it basically goes, oh, that's a 360 video, because it can't tell automatically. And it also actually has to go into a specific folder, because otherwise the phone and the interface doesn't actually know that there's a 360 video on there, because it doesn't automatically search or anything like that. So you have to have a specific naming convention, and you have to put it in a specific folder to work. I felt like I was working on an original game console from 20 years ago. I mean, this is so, and this is a tool that they're wanting mums and dads and kids to use and share all their experiences on. And it was so ridiculously hard to just get a video to play on the phone.
Steph, it is the version of the console.
So what is the answer to a problem like that? Do we, write a harshly written letter to Samsung and tell them that their phone is not exactly the best VR delivery device? What are the answers to these types of problems?
Well, the interesting thing about that is that the actual software that this uses is actually, because it's got plastered all over it, powered by Oculus. So it is actually Oculus's menu system that runs this. Now, I actually said to one of the guys in the team that I'm working with Facebook, I said, well, this is really, really clunky. And he said, yep, I know about it. And I'm like, hang on, your email address is your name at Oculus. You're part of the Oculus team. And he said, yep. And apparently this sort of happens in a discussion. But I think part of the problem is, and I managed to wonder, nobody within a team, like if we're all the same team, we're all working together on the same team, I'm not really wanting to turn around and go, well, actually, Linda, that UI you designed and the interface and everything like that sucks and is crap and you should feel bad. I mean, you can't really work like that because a lot of environments are not very open to critical feedback and stuff like that. Some teams that I've dealt with are like, oh no, we don't want any negativity. We should all be positive. It's like, but if we're not criticizing constructive, sincere, well-meant criticism, nobody gets anywhere. And unfortunately, I think culturally there are some places where it's like, oh no, we all just have to say, rah team, we're doing a good job. That's what your mum's for. Your mum tells you that she's very proud of you and that you've done a good job. Everybody else should be saying, no, I sincerely want to help you make this better. And I'm going to do that by basically pointing out all the things that are wrong with it.
Right. The other thing. Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
I think, how do you solve that problem with Samsung? Well, we're on the track to solve that problem for Samsung. You're not going to solve it tomorrow or next week or next year, right? You have to create standards, right? And but part of the standardization has to be ease of use, right? We can't make the standards so literally hard to use, right? So that you have, his experience with his Samsung phone, it has to be, easy to use. So, one of our problems is we have to sell, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of video gear to a client for virtual reality, and then they want to spend $2,000 on audio, right? And part of that is they don't have an audio expert on staff, and so audio is hard for them, and so they don't really want to have to work with immersive audio because they don't really know. You know, no one's going to grab, you know, Super Collider and, you know, start creating an immersive environment app for themselves. It's just not going to happen, you know, because they don't have the experts on staff. So part of my hope out of this is to make it easy for the end users to create the immersive environments and, you know, anyway, simplification. So
and that's probably going to,
but it's also, sorry, I'll back out, Chris.
No, it seems like that's probably going to involve a lot of intermediate tools. We're going to have we're going to have legacy content, and we're going to have legacy content developers, and you're going to have lots of different kinds of applications. You're going to need to specify tools that bring that content into AR or VR as necessary. And that seems like something that this TC could really contribute with. What's the right way if you really do have just 2 channels coming off the live board? You know, what are your options, and you know, how do you make those options clear to people and implement them?
Right.
But I wanted to make one other sort of broader comment, which is, you know, as important as entertainment content creation is, I want to sort of step back a little bit, and you know, AR and VR are not just entertainment platforms. This is a new paradigm for communication. This is a new telephone. And so there are a lot of applications in telecommunication for us in research, and also in the delivery of clinical services, where we need to think about content a little differently. And so I don't know how to bring that into the conversation about content authoring tools, but I want to keep it in there so we think about that. You know, not.
It should, because some of the most exciting thing is happening with VR is in the areas of medical research. You know, look at what's coming out of USC and how they're using VR to treat veterans coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder, and how VR is now being used in nursing homes for patients and has been proven to lower the amount of psychotropic drugs these people need to take.
Yeah.
So it's a powerful tool, and I completely agree, Chris, that we can't just start sinking what we do into the entertainment whole. You know, all the effort shouldn't be looked at with just entertainment in mind. Oh, how can this be applied to a game or a film or something? We have to kind of keep all these other areas in mind as we create these definitions, as we look towards standards and best practices, because entertainment is just a part of VR, but it's being used for, you know, I met people at SBVR that were using it to sell real estate, to book hotel rooms for medical research. It's huge. And so I think it behooves all of us to keep an eye on, even if we're working only in entertainment, to keep our eye on these other markets as we're creating these definitions and these standards, because they have to be all inclusive. We can't have breakaway groups that says, okay, well, we have a definition of VR as it applies to entertainment, and then the people doing medical research got frustrated because we didn't include them, and they go off and create their own set of definitions. So I think it's really important for us to kind of keep ourselves up to speed. You know, even I know we have copious amounts of free time in all of our lives, but I think it would be good of us as kind of the leading group that's going to guide this technology is occasionally step out of your world and go take a look at what other people are using VR for, because the markets can inform each other, right? We might find something cool in medical research that can help inform somebody who's trying to solve a problem over here in interactive, right? And we would be missing an opportunity if we didn't look for finding solutions cross-platform and doing that pollination. So I'll step off myself.
Thank you for all that, because I totally agree, because very little of our business is actually entertainment. You know, it's very much education, government, commercial, industrial, and they're using VR for very real apps, right? So, you know, serious gaming was a term that we use a lot, right? They are doing real life training or simulation, or, you know, oil and gas exploration. They use it for all types of different things, right? So very real world.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Duran Bagalt wrote the first book on 3D audio as part of his PhD thesis, and he was working for NASA. You know, I draw a lot from Elizabeth Wenzel and Duran Bagalt's work from NASA, because the astronauts have been kind of using this VR stuff for quite a while now, and God knows ambisonic audio is nothing new. So,
and it's very, very relevant. And the one of the things that's really interesting for non-entertainment uses, which coincidentally actually also helps entertainment, is one of the things that I think a lot of people forget. I mean, we're all aware of this, but I think a lot of people forget this, and a lot of people actually don't even know it, is that our hearing is our primary critical warning sense. As far as the senses are concerned, right? If there is danger around us, our hearing is usually the first thing to tell us, because it's 360. If something is happening behind me, if there is a car screeching on the brakes and it's behind me, the only way I know about it is because I hear it. I can't see it, right? In the same way that our hearing is active even when we're sleeping. That's why we have smoke detectors, because your sense of smell stops functioning at night. And this is actually one of the things that is a common thing that I used to describe to a lot of people why audio is important. Now, one of the things, and I'm just going to jump slightly back onto the entertainment thing, but it is relevant to the other things, is that it has already come out. There's already been quite a few examples that people have noticed that the whole the George Lucas quote of audio is 50% of the experience. We all like to think that in film and games, we all like to think that, oh yes, audio is as important as the visuals. It obviously isn't, because we're not getting 50% of the budget. However, with VR and AR,
nor does that ever happen in any of the Lucas companies, I can assure you.
I know, but my point being that in VR, and probably in AR, but in VR especially, audio is mission critical. If you get it wrong, as Linda said before, you could have the best VR experience in the world. If your audio is not up to scratch, the uncanny valley just gets widened by the size of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is the whole point. You can completely, and in fact, there's been a couple of games that did this. There were a couple of the earlier VR games that got released, and the audio was really bad. And literally the entire reviews of these games were basically, oh, there's this game. And then pages of why the game didn't work because the audio completely undermined the experience. And this is just as important for these other entertainment uses. If we are using sound as it should be, as a critical sense, right, as a critical warning sense to basically a surgeon who's using whatever, VR goggles or an AR goggles to do surgery, he's already concentrating on a whole bunch of things. Whereas what he's hearing is there's a whole sense there that has basically got a whole bunch of bandwidth and a whole bunch of space where he can be given really, really important and critical information as to what's going on without it being a UI thing that's getting in the way of him being able to see what he's doing, et cetera, et cetera. This is the same with people working on refineries, people working in the military. And I use this example multiple times. The first time that the average person knows that something is wrong with the car that they drive every single day is that they will notice that it sounds funny.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And this is where VR and AR has massive potential. And just to ask a question to the general group here, I'm wondering, and this is just off the top of my head, is there a benefit in us doing essentially what most businesses do, in that, is there a benefit in us actually reaching out, not immediately, but eventually reaching out to journalists, publications, and all that sort of stuff, and going, you know what, we're working on the technical committee, and we're working on the standards and all this sort of stuff, and we just want to sit you down and we want to show you this experience. Here's this experience with the wrong sound, and here's this experience with the right sound. Do exactly what Linda described before. Oh, that's it with stereo. Here, this is what it's like with spatial sound. If we get key media and journalists on board, then they do the evangelizing for us in some cases.
Yeah, and I think we should. And one of the reasons why is I've read a few of these online VR articles, and even when they've interviewed somebody doing VR audio, they still got it wrong, because the quality of the article is tied to the quality of the person giving the interview. And sometimes the person giving the interview, their expert in VR audio is some guy that has been doing VR audio for like 6 months and thinks he's got it all figured out. So we can't force these people to interview this person and not that person. They're going to go out and find a warm body that thinks they know what they're talking about. But being proactive and approaching these people and saying, hey, if you want to be our audio article, I can hook you up. So
Can I introduce two pragmatic notes here? First of all, I am a journalist, and one of the things I know is a lot of the publications really would rather have somebody give them really good copy than have to assign somebody to go out and get it. So another possibility is that myself or others that are journalists that are involved in this generate some of this content, working directly with you people who are more deeply into it, into the field, then peddle it, rather than necessarily trying to go and get the journalist to go out there, because I'm going to have a much better idea who to talk to than some guy who just works at Wired is going to. He's going to find one good person and 3 or 4 people that aren't. The other thing that I wanted to introduce in terms of pragmatism is I completely agree with the idea that we have to consider all the different customers for this sort of technology. But at the same time, the reality is at some point, they are going to diverge because the needs of these different customers are different. So we just have to recognize that there is a value to trying to consider all of these things, but that they are going to at some point be going their own way, and we don't want to set up such a rigid structure that when that happens, all of our work falls apart.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. So
one of the things from my research, and again, this is just a personal gut feeling, my gut is telling me, well, firstly, I actually don't believe that any of us yet can fully comprehend exactly where VR and AR could be in 10 years' time. I sincerely believe, and I actually say this in our book, we started with, we'll say cave drawings and then, physical artwork. Then we had photography, and photography basically expanded into moving pictures and then television and then games. I sincerely do not believe that VR is an extension of that train track. I actually think that the new realities are an entirely new train track that has an entirely different direction. And I think this is also the problem. I think a lot of people are treating VR and AR as just being, oh, well, we had film, and then we had IMAX, and then we had 3D film, and now we've got VR. It's just another fad. It might be if we don't do it right, but I think if we do it right, I think the new realities are going to be an entirely new form of communication, not just media communication. Now, attached to that is that my gut feel at the moment is that generally, I think that AR is going to move more in the direction of the utility. The AR is going to be the new phone. AR is going to be the way we do things. You've got your glasses on, and you've got your Google Maps is showing you directly on as you drive. It's basically showing you go that way by superimposing something on your glasses or whatever. And I think that AR will be the tool for the surgeon, the engineer, the mum and dad wanting to basically use Google Maps, or the mum and dad wanting to basically keep it. They've got there's a little locator on their kid that's superimposing. Even though they're behind the trees, they know that their child is over there somewhere, etc., etc. Whereas I think VR is more likely to be the entertainment side of things. And I'm not saying those are hard and fast, but I think they both will probably lean in those directions.
good points.
I have a hard stop at 3 because I have a job to do. So I'm going to have to leave you all for the remainder of the discussion session.
Before you do, why don't we do a point of order and talk for a moment about how we're going to proceed?
Yeah, that was something I wanted to float 2 ideas, because for me, getting together with you fine folks and chatting is great. But I kind of like to have something that is an action item or a set of action items that comes out of it. And if I could just, I know I've been talking too much during this already, but if I could bring up two things that I would kind of like the group to consider as action items. One is somehow starting to formulate these categories or these definitions. And the other idea I wanted to float by everybody to get your input in on it is that we're looking at so many people are beta testers, and the gear is just sent out to them. We were talking earlier about how can we let manufacturers know what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. What does the group think about maybe creating an advisory panel, the go-to panel of people that manufacturers know that they can send stuff to, and have this highly trained group of people evaluate their product and send them back some type of detailed report or input? Because we've been a beta test site, but beyond being a beta test site, our company is also a development partner, which goes way deeper than somebody just sending us software and we toy around with it. So what does the group think about the possibility of starting an advisory panel and advertising that advisory panel to the various manufacturers and software developers as, okay, if you want some of the top, sharpest minds to evaluate your product and give you honest to God feedback that we hope you will use, send it to us, send it to this panel. So I'm just floating this idea. I didn't know what anybody would think of that.
I really like it. I can see, like, just from my perspective of where we're at with development with OSIC at the moment, like knowing who to speak to and having those people be really willing to give us feedback in a way that's really constructive for both us and the whole industry as well would be really great. What I think is that the panel should be actually quite large, and there should be people from across many different elements of both the technology and the content as well, and that for like hardware or software developers, that they can nominate like maybe 2 or 3 different categories and maybe 6 people are pulled from that, like flavored in a way that will be most constructive for that business. I think that it should also be kept quite fresh, so we are flexible and it doesn't end up being like the same 15 people for like 10 years.
But the issue with that, though, the issue with that, and I think, Linda, that idea is great, but the issue with that, Sal, is, and this is a perfect example here. So I put out the call for this, the invitation for this call on a bunch of different Facebook groups and suggested that, you know, people can share it further, et cetera, et cetera. And I probably would have had 50 or so people sort of say, oh, fantastic idea. And we've got about 10 people here. And the problem is that I'm on various other committees, advisory boards and other things. And what I've found is that you get an advisory board and you put 10 people on it, and often you'll find 3 people actually do anything. And this is part of the problem, is that I get really frustrated with people who go, oh yes, I'm on this board or I'm on this committee. It's like, yes, and what have you done in the last 12 months? Because it's wasting everybody's time. And more importantly, if we're advertising this to companies saying, hi, we've got this advisory board, and they all turn around and go, awesome, we really, really want your feedback. And let's just say we've got 30 people, as Sal suggests, and there's only 10 of us who are actually doing anything. Those 10 of us are going to be absolutely hammered because all the companies love all this free advice. And then there's 20 people on the advisory board who are not doing anything.
Yeah,
and
I
so
mean, like, money incentivizes people to take action. So maybe there's something that needs to be done in that particular regard to make sure that people are actually doing stuff when they say they're going to do stuff. Because, like, and to kind of also bounce off your point of saying, you know, heaps of people said that they wanted to take part in this discussion, but like X many people showed up and that's only a slight fraction of it. Like, that type of attrition happens with everything, right down to birthday parties on Facebook. So, I mean, like, when you
there's a core issue here, though, which is, and especially as applied to what Sally Ann was saying, the larger this thing gets, but even small, administration is needed. There's got to be somebody who's going to communicate with these companies and who's going to communicate with the board. There has to be some organization about, well, what is it specifically that's being done for these companies? How is this information being gathered? How is it being presented? So there's going to have to be an administrative core to make any sort of advisory board actually functional. And the other thing I will say is, it doesn't necessarily all have to be free. It could be a very nominal cost, but there will be, at the very least, administrative costs that need to be covered.
Right.
Somehow.
Good point. Yeah, I just wanted to float the idea to see if people thought there would be any value in that, because we all agree that there are way too many companies out there developing tools, and where the hell are they getting their input? Because their tools don't always work too good. So who's advising them?
Bob.
And how do you evaluate that?
Yeah.
No, most of these things are designed by Bob. And when I say that, it's because when we were designing game audio education, we talked to a whole bunch of institutions. And I'd sort of say, oh, do you have a game course? And they'd be like, yes, we do. And it's like, oh, great. Do you have an audio element of your game course? And they'd be like, yes, we do. I'm like, oh, excellent. Wow, that's fantastic. Who designed your game audio education? And they'd be like, oh, Bob. I'm like, okay, who's Bob? And they're like, oh, well, Bob's actually the janitor, but, like, you know, he does a little bit of DJing in the week. Like, he listens to
Bob's your uncle.
Well, but this is the whole point. Like, they grab the first person they can oh, you're wearing a set of headphones. You know about audio. You're now our expert. You tell us everything. And it'll be Bob. And Bob basically knows nothing about anything. He just happens to basically listen to music. And yet, they, you know, expert designed by Bob. And it's a very, very common thing, tragically.
Well, I'm happy to take on some early administrative roles, such as, you know, setting up some type of living document that we all have access to that starts to look at least at some definitions, you know, laying out some early parameters for definitions that we can all give input in on. And then perhaps if we want to bat around this idea of creating an advisory board, or if we just feel that it's impractical to try and create one, how are we going to reach out to the manufacturers and give them a chance to, you know, kind of create this dialogue with manufacturers and software developers to get some real feedback to them so that they stop creating products that are so damn hard to use. So
and that's a brilliant point. I mean, it's all very good us sitting here bitching and moaning, but if we don't actually provide them with the feedback or the ability to actually get information, we've got no right whatsoever to actually complain.
So you know, that's why I just wanted to float the idea of an advisory panel. But I would really love to explore this idea of we have a collective. Granted, our collective is rather small today. My hope is, and I'm sure Stefan's hope, everybody's hope here is that this group gets bigger as we, especially the TC for AES. How do we? I've seen it too many times because I'm on too many other TCs, SMPTE and AES. That it's a lot of talk, and then the amount of what actually gets done is really small compared to how much talking we always end up doing in all these meetings we have. What are we going to do? Let's start with definitions. We all agree that that's important. I'm happy to kind of set up some Google Doc that we can all get access to and to start at least spitballing, throwing things up that we can all now start adding to. Great, one action item, we're gonna start getting something done. The next thing is, big pain in the ass for everybody is, how do we reach out to manufacturers? They keep sending us stuff. It does or does not work. It works half-assed or it doesn't. We're a beta tester. We send some, okay, great, do this, and they ignore it or they don't ignore it. How do we do a very real open dialogue with these companies? How do we encourage them to listen to us, to send us something, and then to really listen to what we have to report back? That's the next action item I would like to kind of start for the group.
So why don't we suggest this? Linda, could you please set up the shared document? I have put my email address in the chat, so stefan@soundlibrarian.com. If everybody here who wants to be involved can email me, then I will basically pass that information on to Linda. We can make sure that everybody gets notified of the document. And I say from here, we will organise to basically have another meeting maybe next month. And what we'll do is, Larry, to answer your question, we will use the document to work out what our agenda is for next time. So let's not try to rush and do it now in the next 5 seconds because people are having to leave for various reasons. We will use the document and we will refine. And maybe questions of how do we deal with industry is going to be one of our things. Is it worth setting up an advisory board is one of the things. And we can put a couple of other things. And on that document, we will basically see who's interested, what people want to do, and we use that document to work out what our next meeting, and we'll start to refine an agenda. But rather than trying to do it now in 30 seconds, we will work out an agenda via that document if Linda can set that up.
Actually, what you just said was exactly what I wanted to hear. That is the next step right there.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great.
All right. Well, in that case, I think we're a bit over the hour, and I don't want to hold everybody up forever because literally, I'm sure we could all talk about this for hours. And I've got work to do, as I'm sure we all have. Look, thank you very much, everybody, for your input. There's been some really good things that have come out of this, and I've very much enjoyed it. I'm going to float around just for a second. I'm not going to shut down straight away. So if people have got any other questions, but I will basically look at scheduling one of these maybe in about a month. We'll see how that goes.
Thanks for setting this up, by the way. Thank you so much for setting this up for us.
Absolutely.
Not a problem. I think we all agree that it's needed, and hopefully from here we can do some useful stuff. Michael, can I please definitely get an email from you because I actually want to talk to you about the stuff your company does in regards to my book. So I think what you're doing sounds very interesting.
Yes, absolutely. I've started an email. I do need to run off, but you'll see an email from me tomorrow. And I very much want to talk with you about what we do as well and some of the cool things we've done. And the unfortunate side is the amount of cool audio things we've done is very, very short relative to the amount of cool video things we've done. But that's also part of the story, right? For me is why I'm here is how can I make a leap, step change in that, right? And get audio more a part of what we do. So
outstanding. Yep, I would love to talk to you.
Okay.
Nice meeting everybody, by the way. Great to meet you.
Yes, everybody. Nice meeting nice meeting your kitten or whatever that was, Robert. It was very cool. Whatever it was, I don't know what it was, but it was cool. I like it. That's your mascot.
All right, I'm out. See you later.
Nice to meet you. Thank you,
later.
Stefan.
Thank you, everyone.
Stefan, I'm happy to stay on if you need me for anything. If not, I'm going to go ahead and drop off.
So Linda, just give me a yell if you've got any issues with setting up the document or whatever like that, and we can coordinate that.
I'll catch you. I'll catch you offline so that we can kind of discuss the best way to get it up online and get it distributed to everybody. So let me do that offline so you can chat with the folks you want to chat with.
Not a problem. That sounds great. Thank you very much for coming on, Linda.
So much. Great talking to you.
All right. Talk to you later. Cool. So Graziano, thank you very much for joining in. And
thank you
please
very much.
feel free to contribute however you want to, either via email or next time if you want to jump in again. I definitely want to hear what everybody has to say.
I definitely jump in again next time. Sorry, but I'm in Italy and here is late night, so I'm not so awake to say something. Okay.
No, that's okay. I'm sorry. There's no time that's perfect for the whole world. I had to get up quite early to do this. I tried to find a time that sort of worked for everybody, but it does mean that I think Europe, it was fairly late. So I apologize for that.
Yeah. No, it's okay. It's okay for me. It's okay for me. Not a problem.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. And thank you also, Robert, for sitting in on that. And again, any sort of feedback or comments that you have, more than happy to hear them. And if you want to get involved with this and would love to have your opinions on things.
It'll be my pleasure. Thank you, Stefan.
So, all right. Well, unless anybody's got any questions, I'm going to shut this down and I'll let you know when the next one's going to happen.
Bye-bye.